I love experimenting with stylized renders and kind of obsessed with the cool comic styles, thick outlines, simple shading, and that sort of 2D feel that you can achieve, for example, within ZBrush with the comic MatCap. But what if you could get the exact same look inside Substance 3D Painter? In this video, I'll show you a custom shader that I built with a few simple parameters that you can use to instantly turn your model into a comic illustration, and the best part, you can tweak everything live inside Painter. Hey, if you're new around here, my name is Pablo. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists level up their skills in the world of 3D, all in a way that is fun, clear, and actually doable. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through my simple, free comic shader for Substance 3D Painter. I'm gonna show you how to edit it and some of the cool things that you can do with it. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Alright, so here we are inside Substance 3D Painter. I'm going to be using this character as my demo, and you can see already it looks like an illustration. So I'm going to walk you through all of the things that come with the shader. So if you look here on the right-hand side, all of these are the things that you can change and customize for this shader. So don't worry, I'm going to walk you through the whole thing. But before we jump into this overview, let me answer a couple of questions that I know they're going to be asked straight away. So the first one would be, is it free and where can I get it? The answer is, yep, it's totally free, and you can grab it from the Pablander Academy resource page. This is part of the comic section where you can actually grab other things for ZBrush and other tools. So it's going to be there, and all you're going to get is a simple shader for Painter. So it is a GLSL, and the name is Pablander Comic Shader. It's totally free. You can download it and then drag and drop it into Painter. Don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly how it's done. And the second thing that you might be asking is, what's the point of having this in Painter? Can you export this or kind of like bake what you see here into the textures? And the answer straight away is no, you cannot bake the, let's say, the shading into the texture maps. But what you can do is, utilize it to visualize the comic style and the illustration. And once you do that, you can actually paint, let me just actually do that. You can actually paint this type of hatching effect directly into the model. And this type of hatching, all of these edges and crevices, those are things that can actually be baked into a texture map and then rendered out somewhere else. But if nothing else, it's just a very fun way of creating illustrations, and you can actually take a screenshot in here. Anyway, I created this for me because I like it, but I want to make it available in case you find a good use for it as well. All right, so let's go ahead and jump straight away into the tutorial. The first thing I want to show you is that you can actually change the background. So that makes it a little bit more like an illustration. So I'm going to go to the edit, go to settings, and in here, in the background color, I'm going to choose a similar color to this, just for the time being, for both of these swatches, slightly lighter than a dark gray, so not fully white. Let's click OK, and that's it. So now if I press the Tab key on my keyboard, I have almost like a Photoshop file, and I can just screenshot that, take it into Photoshop and paint. But, the fun part is that this is 3D, and then we can play around with all of the angles. All right, so that is the first part out of the way. What I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and reset everything. So I'm going to choose a different shader. So from the shader settings, this one right here. By the way, let me actually simplify this a bit because this is a custom UI, but I just moved the palettes around. So if you don't see the shader settings, if I close this here, you'll see it from the right-hand side. Is this one right here. I'm just going to drag and drop that in there. Or in fact, let's just put it here and press Tab. And let's actually bring back in the whole thing. So that way you will only see the shader settings and nothing else. And let's collapse anything that we don't need. All right. So to start from scratch, I'm going to show you how to load it and all of that. So let's go ahead and go back to the default one. All right. So this is essentially what the model looks like. And you see it has a bunch of like cuts and crevices. Those are created in ZBrush. Very, very rough, but they're enough to bake the normals and achieve all these crevices from the shader itself. So very, very rough stuff, but all of these cuts that you see here, they were done in ZBrush, and I just export that as a normal map, and with that, I created the effect. So the first thing you need to do is load the shader from the library. Go ahead and download it from the Pablander Academy, and like I said, you're going to end up with a file that is called the Pablander_comic_shader.glsl. It's about 12 kilobytes. That's about it. So I'm going to click on this icon here, and that's going to bring in the asset. Let's actually drop that in here. And it doesn't matter where you drop it as long as you drop it into the asset library. So I'm going to drag and drop the file that I downloaded from the Pablander Academy in here. It's a single file. You see Pablander_comic_shader.glsl. That's the one that I was talking about. And we need to tell Painter what this file is. Fortunately, it's intelligent enough to recognize that this is a shader, but depending on the extension, you will have different things in this case. So it is just a shader. I'm going to click on import, and that's it. You don't need to do anything else. I'm not going to do it because I've already done it. So I already have it in here. And once you import it, you can, get rid of this asset tab here because you will see it now in the shader. So in the shader palette here, we can click on this icon and it's kind of like a drop down. It allows you to choose the Pablander. So it is this one right here. I'm just going to type Pablander. There we go. I imported it twice, but it's any of this really. So you can just find it like that. So I'm going to click on that. And as soon as I click on this, you'll see the effect. There we go. So this is the comic style. And of course, you see that from what I showed you at the beginning of this video, this looks a bit different. That's because I made this, all of these sliders actually tweak how things look so that you can have more control and customize it as much as you want to. So let's go through some of these settings first. The first one right here is this enable outlines. So I'm going to turn it off so you can see what it does. This basically allows you to frame the model nicely, or the outline of the model. So by default, it's going to be enable, but I just want to show you where that is. And then you can play with the thickness of this outline. So I can push this forward or backwards. So this is not going to find or highlight any of the, let's say, the details or the internal details. It's mostly to do with the outline. It just looks like it has some kind of details inside purely because of the model and the stylization of this anatomy, but it is mostly concerned with the outlines and the thickness of that outline. So let's go for something not too drastic, something like that is fine. And now we can focus on the inner line thickness, so the one right below it. So I just started with this section because it's the most obvious one, but you can go, linearly. So inner line thickness allows you to change that thickness inside. So if I push this all the way to 1, you see we get into that territory. We have all of these crevices and details that I created in ZBrush, and then I baked into this model. So I'm gonna control this a bit more. So, that way I can also create a bit of quality of line. So not everything is the same thickness. And that's the idea with this slider. Pretty cool, right? The next sliders like painted highlights, the highline darkness, and the opacity, all of those things are, we're gonna get to that in a bit. But then we also have the curvature line intensity, the normal intensity, and the baked line thickness. So all of these ones are just to give you the alternative to adjust things based on whatever you brought into Painter or whatever you've baked into Painter. So if I take the curvature line intensity, you see it kind of like overrides what I had before because it's using the curvature map that I basically baked, right? So you can adjust not necessarily the thickness, but the reach of what you have here in the inner line. So I know that at first sight, it might look like it's the same thing. So if I turn this all the way to 0 and take the curvature line, you see that nothing happens, right? Because it is trying to combine it with the inner line thickness, which we don't have any. So if I push this all the way to 1, then we can just go ahead and adjust with the curvature. So it's kind of like I'll let you play around with this, but the idea is you push the inner line thickness first, and then you use the curvature line to adjust the intensity a little bit. So you see how it's not necessarily changing the thickness as much, but well, it is doing the thickness, or it's changing the thickness, but it's kind of like spreading from that curvature. So ultimately, it's just fun to play around with these two sliders to fine tune this effect. Then you have the normal intensity, which if I move it, you see is not gonna, maybe here in the center, if I push it all the way to 1, you see how it's kind of like sharpen things up. That is because it's trying to override things with the normal. I will have to change to a different shader to see or visualize what the normals or the normal baked is. But I think, it's another slider that is fun to play with. So I will just use the normal detail intensity to sharpen some of these lines, and that's pretty much it. So ultimately, the inner line thickness, the curvature line, and the normal, you can play with those three to adjust almost like the thickness, but also the taper of those details. That's what I'm trying to do with the normal. And I think it's the most visible is here for some reason. So you see, this is like the thickness that I have with the inner and the curvature. And then with the normal height, because this is a normal detail, I push it forward and it sort of like sharpens that taper and it changes that thickness here as well. Like you see this line right here, that's pretty much what it's doing. All right. Anyway, at the end of the day, it's just a matter of playing around with this. And the bake line thickness, that's basically because I actually brought in the lines or the crevices from ZBrush. I baked those in, so it is using that bake-like thickness. So you could potentially just use whatever you brought in from ZBrush or any other software and just play with the bake line thickness, and that's it. But again, it's just kind of like showing you the different possibilities. At first glance, you will see, okay, these 4 sliders do pretty much the same thing, but I would encourage you to play around with those so that you see what it does. And it would make a lot more sense once I show you the height detection, which is pretty cool. All right, so now that we covered some of the basics, let's go back here at the top where it says MatCap texture. This is basically a simple area that allows you to load a texture into Painter, and you can use that as your MatCap. So I'm gonna bring in the assets once again. And let's jump into Photoshop really quickly because you can create your own as well. So this is just an ellipse that is being framed in a square format document, like 1024 by 1024, I think this is. Let me just double check. Yep, 1024 by 1024. It doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna leave it with bright colors just so that you can identify what I'm doing in this simple image and how it translates to the 3D-ness in Substance Painter. So I'm gonna use this red, Control J to duplicate that, and let's go for a green color here. And let's go ahead and scale this down a bit, and I'm gonna push it up. And let's do the same thing again. So Control J, and I'm gonna use a light yellow. And this is gonna be kind of like the highlight of this. Maybe we can distort it a bit, like so. And just for fun, let's actually take the red one, duplicate it, and I'm gonna take the one at the bottom, and I'm gonna make it blue. And I'm gonna reduce the size of the red one just slightly, like so. There we go. So you can do this in absolutely any way you want. You can create a much more realistic sort of shading of a sphere. But the point is that you can do any colors. Maybe the green is a little bit too much. I'll make it less obvious. Something like that. And then take this one, make it like so. All right. But the point is you can have like these very bright colors just so that you understand how it is wrapping around the model. And then you can adjust this in any way you want. So once you're happy with your MatCap, if you want to create your own, or if you want to download any from the Pablander Academy, there's heaps of MatCaps that I use in ZBrush. They work exactly the same for this. All you need to do is load it into ZBrush and export the image, or create or recreate an image that is the same. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a JPEG, and I'm going to switch to Painter again. And the first thing we need to do is load that image into Painter. So I'm going to drag and drop it into my library. Again, it doesn't matter where you drop it. It's going to ask you what this file is. And because this is a JPEG, it sort of is undefined. So you need to say, all right, this is a texture map. So let's click on texture, click on import. By the way, this dropdown, it allows you to choose if you want to load it into your current session, into the project, if you save this as a project that you're working on, or into your library so that anytime that you open Painter, it will be there. So in my case, I'll just put it in this current session, import, and it will be here. You see I have another MatCap in here. It's probably a good idea to name them properly. But now that I have this, I'm going to close this. I want to click in this select texture, and I'm going to type MatCap. There we go, MatCap. And select this one, and there we go. So this is what the MatCap does in this 3D object. Now there's some sliders that alter the look of this MatCap. So straight away you see the effect, but you can click on this MatCap influence and you can push that further so that you can brighten up those colors. So you see all the way to 2. That's kind of like overdoing it a little bit, but you can just play around with this value and that's it. Then the other thing is the MatCap contrast. You can actually contrast the image in here. It's like using levels in Photoshop if you wanted to. So let's just go ahead and leave this one at 1 and this one at 1 as well. And you can also, in case you want to use polypaint, obviously in this case, it's not an ideal set of colors in this MatCap, but if you have, let's say, 3 different gradient colors in the MatCap and you have polypaint, you can also mix the MatCap with the polypaint. So you can do a screen overlay. So you see how this is changing. That's essentially the same thing as having it in Photoshop as a layer on top and blending them together. So yeah, I just wanted to show you this because you might be interested in using the MatCap, and that's all it is. So the MatCap has the option to choose which image you want to use, the influence, the contrast, and how you blend it with the, I said polypaint before, I mean the albedo when you're texturing your character in Substance Painter. So that's it. So in this case, I'm not going to show you the MatCap, so I'm going to remove it altogether and reduce the influence to 0. So you see how, because we don't have anything, now you can see the hair is black. But if you set this to 1, it's just going to be a little bit brighter because there's nothing in here. So I'm going to reduce that to 0. All right. So now I'm going to show you the next cool thing. So if I bring in the layers, I do have a fill layer here, but I'm just going to ignore that for a second. I'm going to click on a new fill layer. And with this layer selected, I'm going to go to the properties here. In fact, let's just put this on the left-hand side as well. So I have selected this fill layer 2 that I just added. And let's go to the color, and I'm going to choose a bright red color. Great. So you see that we now have the color that we have selected in one of the layers in Painter in the model. Perfect. But there's some areas that have this sort of pinkish or white color. And no matter how you do or what you do with this color is not going to change that. That is because I've added an extra thing, which is the mid shadow threshold. And again, that's another level of control that you can use. So this might not be what you wanted to do, but in case you want to have like a different gradient of colors or like a cel shade, you can achieve that. So that's the next thing in here. So we have the mid shadow threshold, the mid shadow color, and the mid shadow opacity. So these 3 points right here, these 3 parameters. So the opacity right now is set at 0.6. That's why it is not fully white. But if I push it all the way to 1, you see now it gets, the white color, or this swatch right here. So you can actually change this to, let's say, a yellow color, right? And you can combine it and create, I don't know, like like a sunset type of effect. Now, the cool thing about this mid shadow is that you can push it in or out with the threshold. So I can reduce the threshold and reduce it. So if I set it all the way to -1, it's going to be impossible to see. So that's kind of like you get rid of it altogether. Or you can push that in forward, and then it sort of like covers more ground, right? So this is, again, another fun thing to do. Personally, I just want to have the option in there, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to use it all the time. So I could just take this, leave it white, just so that I can really see what is going on. Or actually, let's make it mid-gray or dark gray, and I'll show you something else. Let's reduce the threshold to 0 or to -1, just so that we can see the next thing. Now, I called it the mid shadow because we also have the proper shadow threshold, the one that reacts to the position of the light. So let's go through the shadows really quickly. Let's also turn off this color, just so we can have like a nice sort of clean comic style, like kind of like an outline. And the main shadow control, the one that is going to affect the model the most, is called the shadow threshold, similar to the mid shadow threshold right here. So I'm going to push this forward, and as you can see, it kind of like brings in the character into this really intense, dramatic shadow. So I'm going to do that, something like this. And then I can use the light intensity in the Z axis, which is ultimately very similar to the threshold. It's just using the Z axis, which is kind of like from the back to the front, to push the light in or out, right? So I will usually don't change this. Just leave this one at a value of 1 and then play with the threshold. Because then if you want to change the light position, let's say something that goes from the top and making even more dramatic comic style, you can click on the light direction in the X and the Y. So the first one is going to change, kind of like rotating the light environment around. And the one at the bottom of this slider, the XYY, is going to change the position relative to the, let's say, the floor of the model. So if I push this up, it's going to be all the way up. Maybe I'm going to reduce it slightly so that you can see more when I rotate that light, right? So if I, let's say, put it here, then I can play with the threshold and just achieve a subtle shadow around here. And if you're happy with this, this is kind of like where the mid shadow comes into play. So let's bring in the mid shadow threshold, push it all the way past that initial threshold of the main shadow. So you see the shadow threshold is set at 0.44. As soon as I go over 0.44, you will see that gray value. So I can push it like so, and then you get that nice sort of like cel shading, sorry, that is pretty cool. And both of those shadows, the mid shadow and the main shadow, will react to the position of that light that you can play around with these two sliders. So very simple stuff. It doesn't react to the actual rotation of the environment because there is no environment, or at least this shader doesn't react to any environment. So you have to change the light from here. But you can get some pretty cool and interesting results just by playing around with that. And for the fun part, which is actually to paint some details and get the shader to react to those details, let's go ahead and bring in the layers. Yeah. And let's get rid of this one first. And I've already set this up, but I'm going to do it again just so that you can see how it's done. I'm going to delete that, create a new fill layer. Let's bring in the settings of that layer. And I'm going to set the color to black. It could be absolutely anything that you want, really. But in my case, I just want to have the same color of the outlines. So that's it. It's just a black color. The rest of the channels are off. I'm going to click on a black mask to create a black mask. And then in the magic one to click on add paint. So now, because of the mask, everything is hidden, or like the black color is hidden, and only whatever I paint in this paint layer is going to be visible. So I'm just going to take my pen and paint like so. So this is honestly one of my favorite things, is just to go through a model like this and, refine this type of stuff. And I'm going to do this just very quickly because this is where I can lose track of time and then just spend a lot of time just working on this. By the way, you see that these lines are a little bit fuzzy and the resolution is not great. That is purely because of the resolution of my map. So I just need to increase that if I need to have more resolution. We can do kind of like a more prominent, maybe like a scar like that. Anyway, This is where I spend a lot of the time just working on those lines. And this is usually how I would go about it. And the cool thing about doing it in Painter like this is that it is non-destructive. So I can toggle this on and off, or I can create a new paint layer in here and then just do a bunch of other details. And I know they're independent from the previous layer. So that is the idea. So this is kind of like a very basic way of manipulating details. But if you have high details or displacement, the shader actually helps you control that a bit more. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna turn this off. I'm gonna click on a new layer here. Let's bring in the details again, or like the property, sorry. And in this case, I'm gonna turn off the color and I'm gonna turn on the height information. That's it. I wanna take the height and I'm gonna push it a little bit, maybe to 0.5. I mean, that's a little bit too much. Let's go for 0.4. You'll see why this is happening. So 0.4, and let's do the same thing that I did for the previous one. So I'm gonna do a black mask and add a paint layer. So I'm gonna literally paint with height information. All right, so I'm gonna go into the mask so that you can see what I'm doing. And I'm gonna do some random stuff, okay? Just so that you can see exactly how this is going to look in the shader. All right, now let's go back in here. Nothing happens, right? So if I toggle this on and off, nothing happens. That is because of two things. The first one is that the shader requires that you have the displacement in order to show those lines. So you need to turn that on, and then you need to tweak the shader itself. So let's go ahead and open up the shader settings again. And this is where you have access to the settings for the displacement as well. So I'm gonna scroll all the way down to where it says displacement and tessellation. And in here, I'm gonna set this to 0.05. That's probably a good number. And you see how things change slightly. Let me just do it again. So 0.05. So here, things are happening, but you cannot really see it. And then you can also take the subdivision count, which is essentially the tessellation, how much you are subdividing the model to visualize the change in geometry. You can push that up. So now you can really see, well, kind of, you can really see what is happening around here. But it's gonna be more obvious in just a second. I'm gonna position my camera here. So let's put it at 16, which is already pretty high. And if I were to just play with the scale, you see how much I'm changing that. But 0.05 is a good value. Cool. So now that I have this is working. So we have displacement and we have a little bit of variation here in the outline, but it's not really visible. So we need to go back in here and we need to play with these settings right here. So I'm gonna take the painted height lines, which is essentially what we did. We just painted height. I'm gonna push this all the way to 3. That's pretty intense. I think with just 1 or 2, it would work, but let's just go for something other than 1, something like this, right? So now you can see we're getting some information, but it's not fully black, right? It's just a grayscale. So we can play with the darkness to change. It's almost the same thing as the opacity. So I'm going to push the darkness all the way to 1 and then compensate with the opacity to 1 as well. So now it is fully black. I know that this could have been done with a single slider. I honestly just split it into 2 because I thought it was going to be more clever than what it ended up being, but it honestly does the same thing. So you can use the darkness and the opacity. I just left it as it is. But that way you can sort of like, play around with those at the same time. And then you get the information from the height. So if I go into my paint layer here, once again, now whatever I do, whatever I paint, not only I'm creating the details, but I'm also pushing the geometry out, right? So you can create, and this is just because I push the geometry outwards, but you can do it inwards and create some nice tribal sort of pattern, and that will be cool. But the reason I want to show you this is because you can play around with how the shader interprets the height information. So let's get closer here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this invert height detection. So if I click on this one, you see how things change a bit. I'm going to do it again. And the main difference is that right now it is detecting the highest point of what I just painted, and it's going to paint the black color in that area. But if I invert the height detection, it's going to start from the bottom. Maybe I need a bit more tessellation so you can see this better. All right. So now that I have this, I can just go ahead with the paint height lines and I can go back and forth until I get something like this. There we go. So you see now what happens is that the shader is trying to paint with black, right? Or with the dark color that you choose, the outline of that height information, not the actual paint. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Let me just show you. So the mask is showing me this. So if you turn off the height detection and the height lines, you push it forward, this is basically what you're gonna get in terms of the height. But if you invert it, you're just gonna get kind of like the outlines and the thickness of that height information. And of course, you can play with the lines. You can have the entire thing, or you can just have a little bit, or maybe even less. And not only that, you can go to the layer itself, go to the properties of that layer, and then you can push the hide information inwards like so. And then you just need to play around with the painting lines again. And that way you can customize the hide information with these parameters in here. So now that you know how this works, download this shader and play around with the settings and, start painting that sort of like hatching comic style effect. It is a pretty fun thing to do. And if you find a good use for it, let me know. I'll love to see it. And if you like this type of comic style render, I have another video where you can achieve the entire thing within the NPR filters. So I hope that you find this shader useful. Go ahead and download it. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.